the window, and gently shook his head. "I thought nothing of the rain," he said, "when I was a mere child, getting my living with the dancing dogs. Why should I think anything of it now? My getting wet and your getting wet, Allan, are two very different things. When I was a fisherman's boy in the Hebrides, I hadn't a dry thread on me for weeks together." "But you're not in the Hebrides now," persisted Allan, "and I expect our friends from the cottage to-morrow evening. You can't start till after to-morrow. Miss Gwilt is going to give us some more music, and you know you like Miss Gwilt's playing." Midwinter turned aside to buckle the straps of his knapsack. "Give me another chance of hearing Miss Gwilt when I come back," he said, with his head down and his fingers busy at the straps. "You have one fault, my dear fellow, and it grows on you," remonstrated Allan. "When you have once taken a thing into your head, you're the most obstinate man alive. There's no persuading you to listen to reason. If you will go," added Allan, suddenly rising, as Midwinter took up his hat and his stick in silence, "I have half a mind to go with you, and try a little roughing it too." "Go with me?" repeated Midwinter, with a momentary bitterness in his tone, "and leave Miss Gwilt?" Allan sat down again, and admitted the force of the objection in significant silence. Without a word more on his side, Midwinter held out his hand to take leave. They were both deeply moved, and each was anxious to hide his agitation from the other. Allan took the last refuge which his friend's firmness left to him. He tried to lighten the farewell moment by a joke. "I'll tell you what," he said. "I begin to doubt if you're quite cured yet of your belief in the dream. I suspect you're running away from me, after all." Midwinter looked at him, uncertain whether he was in jest or earnest. "What do you mean?" he asked. "What did you tell me," retorted Allan, "when you took me in here the other day and made a clean breast of it? What did you say about this room and the second vision of the dream? By Jupiter!" he exclaimed, starting to his feet once more, "now I look again, here is the second vision! There's the rain pattering against the window, there's the lawn and the garden outside, here am I where I stood in the dream, and there are you where the shadow stood. The whole scene complete, out of doors and in, and I've discovered it this time." A moment's life stirred again in the dead remains of Midwinter's superstition. His color changed, and he eagerly, almost fiercely, disputed Allan's conclusion. "No," he said, pointing to the little marble figure on the bracket, "the scene is not complete. You have forgotten something, as usual. The dream is wrong this time, thank God! Utterly wrong. In the vision you saw, the statue was lying in fragments on the floor, and you were stooping over them with a troubled and an angry mind. There stands the statue safe and sound, and you haven't the vestige of an angry feeling in your mind, have you?" He seized Allan impulsively by the hand. At the same moment the consciousness came to him that he was speaking and acting as earnestly as if he still believed in the dream. The color rushed back over his face, and he turned away in confused silence. "What did I tell you?" said Allan, laughing, a little uneasily. "That night on the wreck is hanging on your mind as heavily as ever." "Nothing hangs heavy on me," retorted Midwinter, with a certain outburst of impatience, "but the knapsack on my back, and the time I'm wasting here. I'll go out, and see if it's likely to clear up." "You'll come back?" interposed Allan. Midwinter opened the French window, and stepped out into the garden. "Yes," he said, answering with all his former gentleness of manner, "I'll come back in a fortnight. Good by, Allan, and good luck with Miss Gwilt." He pushed the window to, and was away across the garden before his friend could open it again and follow him. Allan rose, and took one step into the garden, then checked himself at the window, and returned to his chair. He knew Midwinter well enough to feel the total uselessness of attempting to follow him or to call him back. He was gone, and for 2 weeks to come there was no hope of seeing him again. An hour or more passed, the rain still fell, and the sky still threatened. A heavier and heavier sense of loneliness and despondency The sense of all others which his previous life had least fitted him to understand and endure, possessed itself of Allan's mind. In sheer horror of his own uninhabitably solitary house, he rang for his hat and umbrella, and resolved to take refuge in the major's cottage. I might have gone a little way with him, thought Allan, his mind still running on Midwinter as he put on his hat. I should like to have seen the dear old fellow fairly started on his journey. He took his umbrella. If he had noticed the face of the servant who gave it to him, he might possibly have asked some questions, and might have heard some news to interest him in his present frame of mind. As it was, he went out without looking at the man, and without suspecting that his servants knew more of Midwinter's last moments at Thorpe Ambrose than he knew himself. Not 10 minutes since, the grocer and butcher had called in to receive payment of their bills, and the grocer and the butcher had seen how Midwinter started on his journey. The grocer had met him first, not far from the house, stopping on his way, in the pouring rain, to speak to a little ragged imp of a boy, the pest of the neighborhood. The boy's customary impudence had broken out even more unrestrainedly than usual at the sight of the gentleman's knapsack. And what had the gentleman done in return? He had stopped and looked distressed, and had put his 2 hands gently on the boy's shoulders. The grocer's own eyes had seen that, and the grocer's own ears had heard him say, "Poor little chap! I know how the wind gnaws and the rain wets through a ragged jacket, better than most people who have got a good coat on their backs." And with those words he had put his hand in his pocket, and had rewarded the boy's impudence with a present of a shilling. "Wrong hereabouts," said the grocer, touching his forehead. "That's my opinion of Mr. Armadale's friend." The butcher had seen him further on in the journey, at the other end of the town. He had stopped, again in the pouring rain, and this time to look at nothing more remarkable than a half-starved cur, shivering on a doorstep. "I had my eye on him," said the butcher, "and what do you think he did? He crossed the road over to my shop, and bought a bit of meat fit for a Christian. Very well. He says good morning, and crosses back again, and, on the word of a man, down he goes on his knees on the wet doorstep, and out he takes his knife, and cuts up the meat, and gives it to the dog. Meat, I tell you again, fit for a Christian. I'm not a hard man, ma'am," concluded the butcher, addressing the cook, "but meat's meat, and it will serve your master's friend right if he lives to want it." With those old unforgotten sympathies of the old unforgotten time to keep him company on his lonely road, he had left the town behind him, and had been lost to view in the misty rain. The grocer and the butcher had seen the last of him, and had judged a great nature as all natures are judged from the grocer and the butcher point of view. The end of the second book. End of chapter. Recording by Nadine Eckert-Boulet.